Dean Martin was once the definition of success. To millions around the world, he was smooth, confident, and effortlessly cool. He had a voice that could soften any room, a smile that made audiences feel at ease, and a presence that turned ordinary moments into unforgettable performances. From sold-out nightclubs to Hollywood films, Dean Martin lived a life most people could only dream of. He had fame, wealth, loyal fans, and a career that spanned decades. Yet behind the charm and the laughter was a much quieter, much sadder truth. While the world applauded him, Dean Martin slowly faded in private, carrying pain that no amount of applause could erase. His final years were not filled with parties or bright lights, but with silence, grief, and deep emotional loss. Standing quietly nearby, even after divorce and heartbreak, was a woman who knew him better than anyone else, his former wife, Jean Martin. Born Dino Paul Crocetti on June 7, 1917, in Steubenville, Ohio, Dean Martin did not grow up surrounded by luxury. His parents were Italian immigrants who worked hard to survive in a steel town where life was rough and money was scarce. English was not spoken often at home, and young Dino struggled in school, feeling like an outsider because of his accent and background. He was teased by classmates and often felt alone. By the time he reached the 10th grade, he dropped out, believing that school had nothing to offer him. Life outside the classroom, however, was even harder. He worked long hours in steel mills, gas stations, and other demanding jobs. He even boxed under the name Kid Crochet, losing most of his fights and collecting scars that would stay with him forever. These early struggles shaped him into a man who learned to hide pain behind humor and charm. Music eventually became his escape. Singing gave Dino something that work and boxing never could: hope. When he began performing in small clubs, people noticed not just his voice, but his relaxed style. He made singing look easy, even when life was not. After changing his name to Dean Martin, his career slowly began to rise. Fame followed, and with it came a new life filled with opportunity. But success also brought pressure, temptation, and distance from the people who loved him most. His first marriage ended painfully, and though he later found love again with Jean, fame always stood between them like an invisible wall. Jean became his emotional anchor, raising their children and supporting him through his biggest successes, while quietly absorbing the pain caused by his absences and infidelities that TO'd the public. Dean Martin appeared untouchable. He joked, drank, and entertained as part of his carefully crafted image. Many believed he lived without worry. In reality, much of that image was an act. The loneliness grew stronger as the years passed, especially after personal tragedies began to pile up. The greatest blow came with the death of his son, Dean Paul Martin, in a tragic plane crash. That loss shattered him completely. From that moment on, the light in Dean Martin dimmed. He withdrew from public life, stopped performing regularly, and lost interest in the fame that once defined him. Jean, despite their divorce, remained close, watching over him quietly, never demanding attention, never asking for recognition. Dean Martin's final years were slow and painful. Illness weakened his body. Grief consumed his spirit, and the once lively entertainer became a man waiting for the end. When he died on Christmas Day in 1995, the world mourned a legend. Las Vegas dimmed its lights in his honor, and fans remembered the songs that made them smile. But behind the public tribute was a private story of love, loss, and loyalty, a story of a man who gave joy to millions but could never escape his own sorrow, and of a woman who loved him until the very end. Even when the world had already moved on as Dean Martin's career began to grow, the change in his life was dramatic and overwhelming. The boy from Steubenville who once struggled to speak English was now performing on stages where people listened closely to every word he sang. His voice, warm and relaxed, felt confident in audiences, and his natural charm made him stand out in a crowded entertainment world. Unlike many singers of his time, Dean never seemed to try too hard. That effortless style became his trademark. Yet behind that calm appearance was a man constantly adjusting to pressure, expectations, and a lifestyle that rarely allowed him to slow down. Fame did not arrive gently. It came quickly and demanded sacrifices that Dean did not always understand until it was too late. One of the most important turning points in his career was his partnership with comedian Jerry Lewis. Together, they became one of the most popular entertainment duos in America. Their films were box office hits, Their live performances sold out, and audiences loved the contrast between Jerry's loud, energetic comedy and Dean's relaxed, straight-man delivery. On stage and on screen, they appeared inseparable. Off-stage, however, tension slowly grew. Dean felt underestimated, treated as if he were only successful because of Jerry. Critics often dismiss him as talentless or lazy, ignoring his singing ability and emotional range. Those judgments hurt deeply, even though Dean rarely spoke about them. When the partnership ended in 1956, many believed Dean Martin's career was finished. He was labeled the weaker half, the man who could not survive alone. What followed proved how wrong those assumptions were. Dean reinvented himself completely. Instead of chasing comedy roles, he leaned into his strengths as singer and actor. He found success in serious film roles, surprising audiences who had never seen that side of him before. Movies like Rio Bravo showed that he could be vulnerable, emotional, and strong without relying on jokes. At the same time, his music career flourished. His songs became timeless classics, played on radios and in homes across America. He was no longer half of a duo. He was Dean Martin, a star in his own right. As his fame grew, so did the distance between Dean and his personal life. Long nights, constant travel, and endless attention made family life difficult. Jean Martin carried much of that burden quietly. She raised her children, kept the household running, and waited through long absences. While Dean was surrounded by applause, Jean often dealt with loneliness. She understood the demands of his career, but understanding did not erase the pain. Dean's affairs, widely whispered about but rarely confirmed publicly, slowly damaged the foundation of their marriage. Jean forgave him again and again, hoping that time would change him. But fame had become a powerful force in his life, one that pulled him further away from home. During the height of his success, Dean joined Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., and others to form the Rat Pack. Their performances in Las Vegas became legendary. To audiences, they represented freedom, confidence, and endless fun. Dean's on-stage persona, slightly drunk, carefree, joking through songs, became iconic. Yet, much of it was an illusion. In reality, Dean was often the most reserved member of the group. He preferred quiet nights to wild parties and frequently went home alone after shows. The image of constant happiness did not match the man behind it. Over time, living inside that image became exhausting. By the late 1960s, the strain showed clearly. Jean's patience wore thin, and Dean's emotional distance grew wider. Despite all the success, award, and recognition, something was missing. Their marriage ended after 24 years, leaving both of them changed forever. Dean moved forward publicly, but privately, those close to him knew he had lost something irreplaceable. The man who once seemed unbreakable was slowly becoming fragile. Even as the world continued to see only the legend by the early 1970s, Dean Martin had reached a level of fame few entertainers ever achieve. His television show was a massive success. His music continued to sell, and his name alone was enough to fill theaters and casinos. To the public, he looked completely at ease, as if success had never weighed on him. Each week on television, he walked onto the stage with a smile, delivered jokes without effort, and sang as though the world had never caused him pain. Viewers believed they were seeing the real Dean Martin, relaxed and carefree. In truth, the show's casual style masked how carefully his life was controlled behind the scenes. While the audience laughed, Dean often felt emotionally distant, going through the motions of a role he had played for so long that it was difficult to escape. After his divorce from Jean, Dean's life became noticeably quieter. Though he remarried briefly, those relationships lacked the deep connection he once shared with Jean. Friends noticed that he spent more time alone, often choosing solitude over social events. He still performed, still appeared confident, but something essential was missing. Fame had given him everything he thought he wanted, yet it could not replace the comfort of family or the peace that comes from emotional stability. The applause faded quickly once the stage lights went off, leaving him alone with his thoughts. That loneliness followed him everywhere, even in rooms filled with people. The most devastating moment of Dean Martin's life came in 1987 with the sudden death of his son, Dean Paul Martin. Dean Paul was not only his child, but also his pride. He was talented, disciplined, and determined to build a life beyond his famous last name. When Dean Paul died in a military jet crash during a training mission, the loss struck deeper than anyone around Dean could fully understand. The search for the wreckage lasted days, each hour filled with uncertainty and fear. When the news was finally confirmed, something inside Dean Martin broke permanently. Friends described him as withdrawn, silent, and emotionally distant from that moment forward. Before the tragedy, Dean had planned to return to the stage with Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. for a highly anticipated reunion tour. It was meant to celebrate their legacy and remind the world of their shared history. After his son's death, Dean tried to continue, but his heart was no longer in it. He appeared on stage only briefly, looking tired and disconnected. Eventually, he walked away from the tour completely. No amount of encouragement could convince him to continue. Performing, once his escape, now felt meaningless without his son. During this painful period, Jean quietly re-entered his life. Although they had been divorced for years, she understood his pain better than anyone else. She did not demand attention or try to fix what could not be fixed. Instead, she stayed nearby, watching over him in silence. Sometimes she would sit in the same restaurant, not speaking, simply making sure he was not completely alone. Her loyalty was not loud or dramatic. It was steady, patient, and deeply human. While the world remembered Dean Martin as a legend, Jean saw him as a grieving father who had lost the person he loved most. From that point on, Dean Martin's life slowed dramatically. He stopped performing regularly and avoided public appearances. Interviews became rare, and when he did speak, his words were often heavy with sadness. He once remarked that he was simply waiting for the end. For a man who had once filled rooms with laughter, those words revealed the depth of his pain. The loss of his son had taken away his desire to move forward. Fame, money, and success could not heal that wound as the years passed. Dean Martin became a symbol of both greatness and loss. His voice still played on the radio, reminding listeners of happier times. But behind the music was a man who had given everything to the world and lost the one thing that mattered most. His story was no longer just about fame or talent. It was about love, grief, and the quiet strength of those who stay when everything else falls apart. After the death of his son, Dean Martin's life entered its final and quiet chapter. The man who once thrived under bright lights now avoided them whenever possible. He rarely accepted interviews, turned down most performance offers, and withdrew from the public world that had once celebrated him endlessly. Fame no longer held any attraction. Even when fans recognized him in public, he responded politely but without the warmth that once defined him. Those close to him understood that grief had changed him permanently. He was not bitter or angry, just tired in a way that went far beyond physical exhaustion. The joy that had once come so naturally to him was gone. As the years passed, Dean's health began to decline. Decades of smoking slowly damaged his lungs, making simple tasks more difficult. Doctors eventually diagnosed him with lung cancer and urged him to undergo surgery. Dean refused. To many, the decision seemed shocking, but to those who knew him well, it made sense. He had already endured the worst loss imaginable. He did not want to fight anymore. When friends questioned him, he calmly replied that he had lived a good life. Those words carried no drama, only acceptance. It was as if he had made peace with the idea that his story was nearing its end. During these final years, Jean remained a quiet presence. She never sought attention or public recognition for her loyalty. She did not speak to the press or attempt to rewrite history. Instead, she continued to do what she had always done best, care in silence. Even though they were no longer married, the bond between them never truly disappeared. She watched over him from a distance, respecting his need for space while making sure he was not completely alone. Their relationship, shaped by love, pain, and shared history, had transformed into something deeper than marriage. It became a quiet promise of loyalty that lasted until the end, and on Christmas Day in 1995, Dean Martin passed away at the age of 78. The cause was acute respiratory failure, the final result of years of damage to his lungs. His death marked the end of an era in American entertainment. News of his passing spread quickly, and tributes poured in from around the world. Frank Sinatra, his longtime friend and fellow performer, described him as a brother. Las Vegas, the city that helped define his image, dimmed its lights in his honor. For 10 minutes, the famous strip stood still, a rare tribute reserved only for legends. It was a powerful moment of silence for a man whose voice had once filled those streets with music. Dean Martin was laid to rest at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles. His crypt bears a simple inscription taken from one of his most beloved songs. Everybody loves somebody sometime. The words captured the heart of his legacy. Through his music, films, and performances, he gave comfort and joy to millions. His voice became a part of people's lives, playing during celebrations, quiet evenings, and moments of nostalgia. Long after his death, his songs continue to connect generations, reminding listeners of a time when music felt warm and personal. Jean Martin never remarried after Dean's death. She lived quietly, surrounded by memories of her family and the life they once shared. When she passed away in 2016, she was laid to rest not far from Dean, a final reflection of the bond that had never truly broken. Their story was not a perfect love story, nor was it a simple tragedy. It was human, complicated, and deeply emotional. Dean Martin's life reminds us that success does not protect us from pain, and that behind even the brightest smiles can exist deep sorrow. Yet his legacy also proves that love, even when tested by time and loss, can endure in quiet and powerful ways. After Dean Martin's death, the world slowly began to look back on his life with clearer eyes. During his peak years, many people focused only on his image. The relaxed smile, the glass in his hand, the effortless jokes. Few truly understood the man behind that image. In the years following his passing, stories from friends, family members, and fellow performers revealed a much more complex person. Dean was not the careless, always happy entertainer many believed him to be. He was private, sensitive, and deeply emotional, someone who felt pain intensely but rarely showed in public. Fame had turned him into a symbol, but that symbol often hid a human being underneath. Dean Martin's influence on American culture remains powerful even decades after his death. His music continues to play on radio stations, in movies, and at family gatherings. Songs like Everybody Loves Somebody, That's Amore, and Volare are not just popular tunes. They are emotional time capsules. They remind listeners of warmth, romance, and simpler moments. His voice carried comfort, and that comfort has outlived him. Younger generations who never saw him perform live still recognize his sound and style. In that sense, Dean achieved something rare. He became timeless. Yet when looking back at his life, it becomes clear that success came at a heavy price. Dean spent much of his adult life performing for others, often at the cost of his own happiness. Long hours, constant travel, and public expectations left little room for personal peace. While audiences felt close to him, he often felt distant from them. That disconnect grew stronger as personal losses accumulated. The death of his son did not just end a chapter. It changed the entire meaning of his life. From that moment on, everything else felt secondary. Music, fame, and applause could no longer provide comfort. Jean's role in his story became more meaningful with time. During Dean's life, she was often described only as his wife or ex-wife. After his death, people began to recognize her quiet strength. She was not a public figure, and she never tried to be one. Her loyalty did not come from obligation, but from love. Even after their marriage ended, she remained emotionally connected to him, understanding his pain in a way few others could. Her decision to stay close without demanding anything in return showed a form of love that is rarely talked about. It was not dramatic or visible, but it was constant. Dean Martin's life also serves as a reminder that public success does not equal personal fulfillment. He achieved nearly everything a performer could dream of, yet he struggled with loneliness and grief. His story challenges the idea that fame brings happiness. Instead, it shows how important emotional support, family, and connection truly are. Without them, even the brightest spotlight can feel cold. Dean gave joy to millions, but his own joy was fragile, easily broken by loss that in the years since his passing. Documentaries, biographies, and tributes have tried to capture who Dean Martin really was. None can fully do so. Like all complex individuals, he cannot be reduced to a single image or story. He was a loving father, a loyal friend, a talented artist, and a man deeply affected by sorrow. His life contained beauty and heartbreak in equal measure. That balance is what makes his story so powerful. It reminds us that behind every legend is a human being with fears, regrets, and emotions. Today, Dean Martin is remembered not just for his achievements, but for the feeling he left behind. His voice still brings smiles, his films still entertain, and his legacy continues to grow. But perhaps the most important part of his story is the quiet lesson it offers, that life is not measured only by success, but by love, connection, and the people who stay with us when everything else fades as time continues to pass. Dean Martin's legacy has only grown stronger. What once seemed like simple entertainment is now understood as something much deeper. His relaxed style, which some critics once dismissed as laziness, is now recognized as confidence and control. Dean never needed to shout to be heard or push himself into the spotlight. He let his voice, timing, and presence do the work. In an industry built on constant self-promotion, his calm approach set him apart. That quiet strength is one of the reasons his work has endured long after many of his contemporaries faded from memory. Dean Martin represented a unique era in American entertainment, one where performers were expected to do everything, sing, act, host, and connect with audiences across multiple platforms. He mastered all of it, yet he never appeared desperate for approval. That sense of ease made people trust him. When he sang about love, listeners believed him. When he joked on stage, it felt natural rather than forced. Even today, his performances feel warm and personal, as though he is singing directly to the listener. That emotional connection is rare, and it explains why his work still resonates with audiences who were not alive during his peak years. However, understanding Dean Martin fully requires looking beyond the music and films. His life story reveals the emotional cost of being constantly admired. Being seen by everyone does not mean being understood. Dean often felt isolated despite being surrounded by people. He guarded his private life carefully, not because he had nothing to say, but because he did not know how to share his pain publicly. In many ways, his silence spoke louder than any interview ever could. He carried his grief quietly, especially after losing his son, and never attempted to turn that tragedy into public sympathy. Jean's presence in his final years add an important dimension to his legacy. Her quiet loyalty shows that love does not always need a title or public acknowledgement. While the world focused on Dean's fame, Jean focused on his humanity. She understood that behind the legend was a man who needed stability, familiarity, and understanding. Her choice to remain nearby, without expectation, demonstrated a rare emotional maturity. It also revealed that their bond was never truly broken, only transformed by time and circumstances. Dean Martin's story also offers a lesson about how society treats its icons. During his life, he was often reduced to a character: the smooth singer, the carefree drinker, the charming comedian. After his death, people began to see the fuller picture. They recognized his discipline, professionalism, and emotional depth. They also acknowledged his pain. In doing so, his story became more relatable. He was no longer just a star on a stage, but a man who struggled, loved deeply, and suffered great loss. Today, Dean Martin is remembered with both admiration and understanding. His music continues to bring people together, playing at weddings, family gatherings, and quiet moments at home. His films still entertain, and his television work remains a model of effortless charm. But perhaps his greatest legacy is the emotional honesty his life reveals when looked at closely. He reminds us that even those who seem to have everything can feel empty, and that grief can change a person forever. In the end, Dean Martin's life was not defined by how it ended, but by what he gave. He gave laughter, comfort, romance, and moments of joy to millions. He gave his family love, even when he struggled to express it. And through his story, he gives future generations a reminder to look beyond appearances. Behind every famous face is a real person with hopes, fears, and wounds. Dean Martin's voice may have fallen silent, but the truth of his life continues to speak, softly, honestly, and with lasting impact. While the world mostly knew Dean Martin as an entertainer, those closest to him understood that his most meaningful role was being a father. Fatherhood grounded him in ways fame never could. Despite his busy career and long absences, Dean deeply loved his children and took pride in their achievements. He was not always emotionally expressive, but his care showed in quiet, practical ways. He made sure his children were provided for, protected from the harsher sides of fame, and encouraged to find their own identities rather than live entirely in his shadow. This was especially true for his son Dean Paul Martin, who chose a disciplined life in the military rather than relying solely on Hollywood opportunities. Dean's approach to parenting reflected his own upbringing. Raised in a hard-working immigrant family, he believed in independence and resilience. He did not spoil his children with constant attention or praise, but he expected them to be strong, respectful, and self-reliant. Some interpreted this distance as coldness, but those who knew him well understood it as caution. Dean had grown up learning that the world could be harsh, and he wanted his children to be prepared for that reality. Fame, in his eyes, was never a guarantee of happiness, and he did not want them to depend on it. The loss of Dean Paul revealed just how deeply fatherhood defined him. Until that moment, Dean had endured criticism, failed marriages, and professional pressure without breaking publicly. The death of his son removed the emotional foundation that had quietly supported him for years. Friends noticed that he no longer spoke about the future. His conversations focused on memories rather than plans. The grief did not come in dramatic displays, but in withdrawal and silence. For Dean, losing his son felt like losing the part of himself that still believed life could move forward. Media coverage of Dean Martin throughout his career often simplified him into an easy stereotype. Headlines focused on his Rat Pack image, his relaxed drinking act, and his playful detachment. Rarely did the media explore his discipline, professionalism, or emotional complexity. Dean arrived on time, knew his music perfectly, and treated crews with respect. Many people who worked with him described him as kind and generous, especially toward those behind the scenes. He disliked conflict and avoided confrontation whenever possible. This quiet professionalism rarely made headlines, but it shaped how deeply he was respected within the industry. Gene's understanding of Dean as both a father and a man added another layer to their connection. She saw how much he loved his children, even when he struggled to show it openly. She watched him change after the loss of Dean Paul and recognized that his grief was not something that could be fixed or rushed. Her continued presence was not about returning to past, but about honoring who he was in the present. She accepted his silence and sadness without trying to reshape him. That acceptance became a source of quiet comfort during his final years. A.S. public interest in Dean Martin's life continues. Historians and fans have begun to reevaluate his story more carefully. Instead of focusing only on glamour and tragedy, they now explore the balance between success and sacrifice. Dean's life shows that talent can open doors, but it cannot protect against loss. His experience as a father, especially his bond with his son, reveals the depth behind the image. It explains why his later years were so quiet and why fame no longer mattered to him. Dean Martin's story ultimately reminds us that public smiles often hide private struggles. He gave the world laughter and music, but his deepest emotions were reserved for those he loved most. His journey as a father, a performer, and a man shaped by loss adds meaning to his legacy. It transforms him from a distant legend into someone profoundly human, whose life continues to resonate not because it was perfect, but because it was real. For many years, the public image of Dean Martin was shaped more by myth than by reality. The character he played so well on stage, the slightly drunk, carefree entertainer who seemed untouched by responsibility, became the version of him that people remembered most. That image was entertaining, but it was incomplete. In truth, Dean was one of the most disciplined performers of his generation. He rarely drank on stage, often filling his glass with apple juice or water. His relaxed delivery was not the result of carelessness, but confidence and preparation. He understood timing, rhythm, and audience psychology better than most, and he used those skills to make everything look effortless. This misunderstanding followed him throughout his career. Critics sometimes labeled him lazy or unambitious, unaware that his approach was a deliberate artistic choice. Dean believed that entertainment should feel natural, not forced. He did not believe in over-rehearsing or over-explaining jokes. This philosophy carried into his television work as well. When he demanded minimal rehearsals for the Dean Martin show, many executives thought he was arrogant. Instead, he proved that trust in one's instincts could produce something genuine. The show's success changed how television variety programs are produced, giving performers more freedom and control. Another common myth surrounding Dean Martin was that he was emotionally distant or uninterested in others. While he was private, he was not unkind. Many people who worked with him described acts of generosity that never reached the press. He quietly helped struggling performers, treated crew members with respect, and avoided humiliating others for the sake of a joke. He disliked cruelty and confrontation and preferred to withdraw rather than argue. This tendency to retreat inward often made him appear cold, but it was actually a form of self-protection. Understanding these traits helps explain why Dean struggled so deeply later in life. His coping style had always been to withdraw, to turn inward rather than outward. When tragedy struck with the loss of his son, that instinct intensified. He did not seek public sympathy or dramatic displays of grief. Instead, he stepped away from the world. To outsiders, this looked like indifference. In reality, it was pain too heavy to express. His silence became his way of surviving. Jean understood this side of him better than anyone. She did not expect him to speak openly or change his nature. She accepted him as he was, both the public icon and the private man. Her loyalty was rooted in understanding, not illusion. She knew that behind the myths was a person who felt deeply but expressed little. That understanding allowed her to remain close without forcing conversation or emotional displays. It was a rare form of empathy, and it explains why she remained an important presence in his life even after their marriage ended. Modern audiences revisit Dean Martin's life. These myths are slowly being corrected. Documentaries, biographies, and personal accounts now present a fuller picture. They show a man who was serious about his craft, cautious about fame, and deeply affected by personal loss. This reevaluation does not diminish his legend, it strengthens it. By understanding the truth behind the image, fans can appreciate not only what Dean gave the world, but what it cost him to give it. Dean Martin's story reminds us how easily public figures can be misunderstood. When a persona becomes larger than the person, the human story often gets lost. In Dean's case, that human story is one of discipline, restraint, love, and quiet suffering. Recognizing that truth allows his legacy to be remembered with greater respect and compassion. He was not just the king of cool. He was a man who carried great weight behind a gentle smile, and that truth deserves to be remembered. Dean Martin's life, when examined fully, offers lessons that go far beyond entertainment. While most people remember him for his charm, music, and films, his story also teaches about resilience, love, and the human cost of fame. Despite his effortless public persona, Dean endured hardships that many could not imagine. He faced poverty as a child, bullying at school, and the struggles of building a career from nothing. Later, he navigated the pressures of Hollywood, public expectations, and personal losses, most profoundly the death of his son Dean Paul. Each of these challenges shaped the man behind the legend and influenced the way he approached life, family, and work. His approach